I never thought the boy who once shoved me into lockers would one day lock me in a penthouse and call it love. My name is Nia Jackson, 26 years old, born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I spent my days as a social worker at a community center, helping kids who reminded me of the scared girl I used to be. I believed in second chances, in small acts of kindness that could change everything. That belief shattered the night. Two men in black suits dragged me from my apartment without a word. They drove me to a glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan, the kind of place normal people only saw in movies. When the elevator doors opened, he was waiting. Lee Hyun-woo. Tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a midnight black suit that cost more than my yearly rent. His dark eyes locked on mine like I was the only thing in the room. 10 years ago in high school, he was the quiet Korean transfer student who made my life hell, tripping me in the cafeteria, whispering, "You don't belong here," just loud enough for his crew to laugh. Now he was the ruthless king of Chicago's Korean Mafia syndicate. "Your father owes us $3 million, he said, voice low and calm. "He can't pay, so you will." I laughed, even though my hands shook. "Are you? You've lost your mind." He stepped closer, close enough that I smelled sandalwood and danger. "The ceremony is in 3 days. Try to run and your father disappears. Stay and he lives." That night, they locked me in a bedroom bigger than my whole apartment. Silk sheets, a view of the skyline, and a guard outside the door. I curled up on the floor and cried for the girl who still believed kindness could fix anything. I didn't know yet that the man who broke my heart once was about to hand it back to me in pieces. The next morning, a soft knock woke me. A middle-aged Korean woman named Mrs. Park slipped inside with breakfast and a gentle smile. "Mr. Lee said you might be hungry." I expected cruelty. Instead, she sat with me while I ate, telling me stories about her own daughter back in Seoul. When I asked why she worked for a man like Hyun-woo, she simply said, "He saved my family once." People are more than the worst thing they've done. I started small. I thanked the guards by name. I asked the cook if I could help in the kitchen just to feel useful. Hyun-woo watched from the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. On the second day, he came in alone. "Why are you being nice to them?" "Because they're people," I answered. "I hate 'cause they're people," I answered. "The same as you and me." He laughed once, short and bitter. "You haven't changed. Still the same soft-hearted girl He stopped, jaw tight. I waited for the old insult. It never came. Instead, he left a stack of books on the nightstand. My favorite authors, the ones I used to read in high school to escape his bullying. That night, I lay awake wondering if the bully I remembered had been hiding something kinder underneath all along. The wedding was a blur of white silk and armed men in tuxedos. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, his eyes full of guilt and relief. Hyun-woo waited at the altar, looking like a king who owned the world. When the officiant asked if I took him as my husband, I whispered, "I do," through gritted teeth. His hand was warm when he slipped the ring on my finger. Afterward, in the private reception, he pulled me aside. "You're free to move around the penthouse now, but you don't leave the building." I nodded, already planning my escape in my head. Instead, I found myself in the library he kept for me. He had remembered every book I loved. When I asked why, he shrugged. "You used to read under the bleachers to hide from me." I noticed. It was the first crack in my armor. I started leaving little notes from Mrs. Park, recipes from my grandmother, words of thanks. She cried when she read them. Hyun-woo saw the notes one evening and his expression softened for half a second before the mask returned. Weeks passed. I learned the rhythm of the penthouse, the quiet way Hyun-woo worked at 3 a.m., the way he never raised his voice even when giving orders that made grown men pale. One night I heard shouting from his office. A rival gang had taken one of his young runners, a 16-year-old boy named Ji-hoon. Hyun-woo was ready to burn the city down. I stepped into the office without thinking. "Let me talk to the boy's mother. She's terrified. Maybe there's another way." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "I guess isn't your community center, Nia?" I said quietly. "No," I said quietly. But people are still people." To my shock, he let me go with 2 guards. I sat with Ji-hoon's mother for hours, holding her hand, promising I would bring her son home. When I returned, Hyun-woo was waiting. The boy was already safe. My words had bought time for a peaceful exchange. He didn't thank me, but that night he left the library door unlocked and a note that read, "You keep surprising me." Living with him started to feel less like prison and more like a strange, fragile truce. I cooked soul food one Sunday, collard greens, cornbread, mac and cheese. The entire staff showed up. Hyun-woo ate quietly at the head of the table, listening to everyone laugh for the first time in years. Afterward, he found me on the balcony. "Why do you keep giving when the world only takes?" I looked at the city lights. "Because someone has to start." He didn't answer, but the next day he canceled a shipment of guns I'd overheard him planning. I pretended not to notice. Small kindnesses were stacking up like dominoes between us. The first real twist came on a rainy Thursday. I found an old yearbook hidden in his desk while looking for a pen. There was a photo of me from senior year circled in red ink. On the back he had written in Korean and English, "She's the only one who ever looked at me like I could be better." My hands shook. All those years I thought he hated me because I was black, because I was different. The truth was simpler and more painful. He had been drowning in his family's criminal world and pushed me away so I wouldn't drown with him. When he walked in and saw the yearbook, his face went pale. "I was a coward back then," he said. "I thought if I made you hate me, you'd stay safe." I didn't forgive him right away, but I didn't run either. For the first time, I saw the boy behind the Mafia king. Tension built when his biggest rival, a Russian boss named Victor, declared war. Bullets flew. One night, the penthouse was attacked. Glass shattered, alarms screamed. Hyun-woo shoved me into a safe room, but I refused to stay. I found Jae-hoon bleeding in the hallway and dragged him to safety, pressing my scarf to his wound while bullets whizzed overhead. Hyun-woo burst in, covered in blood that wasn't his, and saw me cradling the boy. His eyes widened with something raw and terrified. "You could have died." I couldn't leave him," I whispered. He carried us both to the medical room himself. That night, while doctors worked on Jae-hoon, Hyun-woo sat beside me on the cold floor and, for the first time, took my hand without force. "I don't deserve you," he said, "but I'm starting to want to." The emotional storm hit 2 nights later. Hyun-woo came back from a meeting bleeding from a knife wound in his side. He tried to hide it, but I found him in the bathroom, shirt off, stitching himself with shaking hands. I took the needle from him without asking. My fingers were gentle on his skin as I cleaned and closed the gash. He watched me the whole time, breathing shallow. "Why are you still here, Nia?" "I forced you. I locked you up." I tied the last stitch and looked him straight in the eyes. "Because I see the man you're trying to become. And I think the world needs more people who choose kindness even when it's hard." Tears, actual tears, filled his eyes. He pulled me into his arms and held me like I was the only safe thing left in his violent life. In that moment, the bully, the king, and the broken boy all fell away, leaving only Hyun-woo, the man who was learning how to love. After that night, everything shifted. He started dismantling pieces of the empire, quietly at first, then faster. He funded the community center where I used to work. Aw. He sat with me on the balcony every evening, listening to my stories about the kids I helped, about my dreams of opening a bigger shelter. He told me about his own childhood, the pressure of being the heir to a criminal throne, the loneliness that made him cruel. One quiet afternoon, he got down on one knee. Not because of a debt, but because he wanted to. "I'm asking this time, Nia, not forcing. Will you stay with me? For real?" I said yes through happy tears. The forced marriage had become the beginning of something chosen. Hyun-woo's empire was smaller now, cleaner, focused on protection instead of fear. I still worked at the center, and he came with me sometimes carrying bags of supplies, learning how to be useful instead of powerful. Gi-hoon was healed and back in school, Mrs. Park's daughter had come to visit, and my father was finally free of his debts. But the greatest gift was the man beside me who had learned that love wasn't about locking someone in. It was about setting them free and hoping they chose to stay. We weren't perfect. We still argued. But every day we chose kindness, chose each other, and built a life bigger than the pain that brought us together. And in the end, the girl who believed in humanity and the king who once ruled with fear proved that even the darkest hearts can find their way home when someone refuses to stop believing in their light. Months had slipped by like silk through fingers, and the penthouse that once felt like a golden cage had slowly transformed into something warmer, something that almost resembled home. Yet every single morning, when I woke up beside Hyun-woo, I still caught myself wondering if this fragile piece would shatter, because deep down I knew the world outside still wanted blood and power, and the man who used to bully me in high school corridors was now the same man whose arms wrapped around me every night like I was the only anchor keeping him from drowning in the darkness he once ruled with an iron fist. And as the first light of dawn painted the Chicago skyline in soft pinks and golds, I would trace the scars on his chest, the ones he never talked about, and whisper silent prayers that the kindness I tried to plant in his heart would grow strong enough to survive the storms that were surely still coming, because love born from force and debt and old wounds could either heal or destroy everything it touched. And today was one of those quiet mornings where Hyun-woo stirred beside me, his dark eyes opening slowly to find mine already watching him. And instead of the cold Mafia king mask he gave me that small, rare smile, the one that made my stomach flutter even after all these months, the one that reminded me he was learning how to be human again. And he pulled me closer, murmuring in that low voice that still carried traces of his Korean accent mixed with years in America. Good morning, my wife. And those two words, my wife, still sent warmth rushing through me, because they were no longer spoken as a command, but as a choice, a daily promise. He kept choosing me, choosing us, and I kissed him softly, tasting the remnants of last night's shared laughter, and whispered back, "Good morning, my husband," before the day pulled us into its rhythm. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken hanging between us like the calm before a storm. And after breakfast, when Mrs. Park brought in fresh coffee with her usual gentle smile, she lingered a little longer as a than usual, her eyes flicking toward Hyun-woo with quiet concern. And I knew something was wrong, because the staff who once feared him now looked at him with a mix of loyalty and worry, the kind that came from seeing a man try to change his entire world for the woman he once locked away. And when I finally asked him straight out what's happening, Hyun-woo set his cup down carefully, his fingers brushing mine in that protective way he had developed. And he told me Victor, the Russian rival we thought was finished, had resurfaced stronger with new alliances and old grudges, and he was coming for everything, including the community center I poured my heart into, and the shelter we had just opened together, the one where kids from all backgrounds could find safety and kindness without fear of the streets or the gangs. And my heart clenched, because that center wasn't just a building, it was my life's work, the place where I had seen broken boys become hopeful young men and girls who reminded me of my younger self, learn that they were worthy of love and respect. And the thought of Victor destroying it because of me, because of this forced marriage that had somehow bloomed into real love, made anger and fear twist inside me. But instead of hiding or running, I looked at Hyun-woo and said, "We fight this together, not with more guns or more blood, but with the one thing he was still learning how to use, his humanity." And he stared at me for a long moment, those sharp features softening in the way only I could make them soften. And he nodded, even though every instinct in his Mafia-trained body screamed to lock me away again, to protect me. The old way, but he was changing. He was choosing a different path, and that afternoon, the back listening, learning, and one afternoon, a teenage girl who had been through more than any child should named Aisha broke down crying during a session about feeling invisible because of her skin color and her circumstances, and without thinking, Hyun-woo stood up, walked over, and knelt beside her shoulder, saying in his accented English, "I once made someone feel invisible too. Someone very much like you, and I was wrong. It took me too long to see her light, but I see yours now, and you are not invisible. You matter." And the girl looked up at him, tears streaming, and hugged him. And in that moment, I saw emotional climax building, the act of compassion from the unlikeliest source creating ripples of healing. And when Asha later told her friends about the scary Korean man who said she mattered, the whole center buzzed with a new kind of hope. The kind that said even bullies can become protectors. That night back in the penthouse, Hyun-woo held me close and confessed that helping that girl felt better than any victory he had ever won in the streets. And I whispered, "That's because Kai's legacy, that violence never can." And he nodded against my hair, his body relaxing in a way it had before. And just when we thought the negotiations might work, Victor struck anyway, sending men to attack the center during a youth event, and chaos erupted, screams, glass breaking, and I was there with the kids, hiding them in the back rooms, my heart pounding as I tried to keep them calm, singing old gospel songs my grandmother taught me to drown out the fear. And Hyun-woo arrived like a storm. But instead of unleashing hell, he coordinated with the guards to evacuate everyone safely, first prioritizing the children and the elders. And when a bullet grazed his arm, he didn't flinch. He just kept moving. Until every last person was out, and only then did he face the attackers with controlled force, ending the threat without unnecessary slaughter. And as the sirens wailed in the distance, he found me covered in dust, holding a little boy who had been crying, and he pulled us both into his arms, whispering, "I'm sorry I brought this to your door, but I promise I will end it." And in his eyes, I saw the depth of his love, the willingness to change everything for me and for the humanity I represented. And the days that followed were a blur of repairs, community support, and Hyun-woo working tirelessly to strengthen alliances the right way through trust, not fear. And slowly Victor's support crumbled because even criminals respected a man who chose his wife and her values over endless war. And one evening, as we stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights now, including the newly repaired center, glowing in the distance, Hyun-woo turned to me and said, "Nia, you forced me to see the world differently. Not with chains, but with open hands. And I realized that locking you up was the biggest mistake that led to the greatest gift." And I smiled through tears because the journey from bully to husband, from captor to partner, had been messy, painful, and beautiful. And though we still had battles ahead, the foundation we built on kindness, selflessness, and unexpected compassion had created something unbreakable. And as he kissed me under the Chicago sky, I felt the positive shift, the inspiration that even though the most ruthless hearts could be softened when met with unwavering humanity, and our story continued not as a fairy tale, but as a real testament to choosing love every single day, no matter where it started. From the forced marriage, the old bullying, the locked doors had all become chapters in a longer tale of redemption and growth. And together we kept moving forward, one act of kindness at a time, proving that light could indeed find its way into the darkest corners if someone refused to stop believing in its power. And the man who once was my bully now walked beside me, not as a king of fear, but as a king of fear, but as a partner in building something better, something lasting, something rooted in the very humanity that had saved us both. The city lights kept twinkling below us like silent witnesses to the quiet revolution happening inside the penthouse and inside the heart of the man who once locked me away and called it protection. Yet every evening as Hyun-woo and I stood on that same balcony with the cool Chicago wind brushing faces, I could feel the shift deepening, the way his hand rested on the small of my back, no longer possessive but gentle, almost reverent, as if he was still amazed that the girl he bullied in high school corridors was now the woman who had somehow cracked open his armored world and taught him that soul strength could look like holding a crying child instead of pointing a gun. As the weeks turned into months after the attack on the community center, the repairs were completed with help from neighbors and even some of his former rivals, who had started to watch this unusual alliance with curiosity. Because word had spread through the underground that the ruthless Korean boss was changing, not because he had gone soft, but because the love of a kind-hearted black woman from the South Side had shown him a different kind of power, the power of selflessness and humanity that didn't need violence. Last, and Hyun-woo himself began to spend more mornings at the center, arriving early in simple clothes without the expensive suits, rolling up his sleeves to help paint walls or stock shelves, or sit with the teenagers during mentoring sessions where he would share pieces of his own past, carefully edited so as not to scare them, but honest enough to show that even someone who grew up in a world of crime could choose a better path. And the kids listened wide-eyed because here was this tall Korean man with sharp features and a quiet intensity who used to rule with fear, now listening to their dreams of becoming doctors or artists, or simply safe. And one particular afternoon, a boy named Marcus, who reminded me so much of the scared version of myself, sat across from Hyun-woo and asked straight out, "Why did you used to be so mean to Miss Nia back in school?" And the whole room went quiet, waiting for the answer. And Hyun-woo didn't deflect or get angry. He looked at me first as if drawing strength from my presence, and then told the boy I was afraid back then afraid of how much light she carried in a world that rewarded darkness, and instead of protecting that light, tried to dim it because didn't know how to protect anything without breaking it. But she taught me that real protection means lifting others up. And the boy nodded slowly and later hugged him. And in that simple exchange, I saw another layer of healing unfolding, the unexpected twist where the former bully became the mentor. Man who once shoved me aside now stood beside me, helping others find their way. And as the days passed, our life together wove tighter threads of cultural blending, Mrs. Park teaching me how to make perfect kimchi, while I showed her the secrets of my grandmother's sweet potato pie and the Dinners became loud, joyful affairs, filled with laughter and stories where guards who once watched me like prisoners now shared jokes and asked for seconds of collard greens, and Hyun-woo would sit at the head of the table, watching it all with a soft expression that made my heart ache with love. Because this was the man learning selflessness, one shared meal at a time, and one night after everyone had gone, he pulled me into the library, the same room where he had once left books for me as silent apologies, and he opened an old photo album I had never seen before, pages filled with pictures from his childhood and soul before the Mafia life fully claimed him, pictures of a small, serious boy with big dreams that got buried under family expectations. And when he pointed to one image of himself as a teenager looking lost, he whispered, "I saw you in high school, Nia, and you were everything I wanted. To be free and kind and unafraid to care, and I pushed you away because keeping you close would have meant admitting I could be better." And in that vulnerable confession, the emotional weight of our journey pressed down on us, and I took his hands in mine, feeling the calluses from recent manual work at the center, and I told him, "You're becoming that better man every single day." And he pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine, breathing me in like I was the oxygen he needed to keep changing. And the next morning brought another surprise when Gi-hoon arrived at the penthouse, not as a runner, but as a young man, ready to enroll in community college, with dreams of becoming a counselor, and he credited both of us for showing him that family could be chosen, not just inherited through blood or crime, and Hyun-woo funded his tuition without hesitation. No strings attached, and as we watched Ji-hoon leave with hope in his eyes, I turned to my husband and said, "This is what kindness does, it multiplies." And he nodded, understanding that the compassion I showed him when he was still the captor was now rippling outward, touching lives we never imagined. And yet the shadows of the past refused to fade completely, because Victor, sensing the cracks in his own empire, doubled down on threats, sending anonymous messages promising to take everything I loved unless Hyun-woo returned to the old ways of dominance. And one tense evening, as we reviewed new security plans at the center, a brick crashed through the front window with a note attached reading, "Your black queen won't save you forever," and fear gripped me. Not for myself, but for the children who called this place safe, and Hyun-woo's jaw tightened, the old ruthless glint flashing in his eyes for a split second before he took a deep breath and chose differently. Instead of immediate retaliation, he called a press conference, something no one expected from Hobwo. Mafia King, announcing publicly that the center would expand with new programs for at-risk youth funded through legitimate businesses he was transitioning into. And when reporters asked about rumors of his criminal ties, he looked straight into the cameras and said, "My wife taught me that legacy matters more than power, and I choose a legacy of lifting communities, not destroying them." And that statement sent shockwaves through the city. Some called it a PR stunt. Others saw the genuine shift, and slowly community support poured in, donations, volunteers, even former skeptics offering help. And as the center grew stronger, Victor's isolation increased because his threats began to look small against the wave of humanity. We were building together, and in the quiet nights that followed, Hyun-woo would hold me tighter, whispering stories of his past mistakes, the times he had hurt people, including me, and how refusal to stop showing kindness even when locked away had planted seeds he couldn't ignore. And one particularly emotional night, after a long day, he broke down for the first time, letting tears fall as he confessed that forcing our marriage was his way of claiming something good in a life filled with loss. And I held him through it, rocking him gently like I would one of the center kids. And in that raw moment, the climax of compassion peaked, because my act of holding space for his pain without judgment allowed him to release the weight he had carried for years. And when he finally looked up, at his eyes red but clear, he said, You saved me, Nia, not by fighting me, but by loving me anyway, and I kissed away his tears, knowing that this was the unexpected realization. The bully had become the protected. The king had become the student, and our bond had deepened into something unbreakable, rooted in mutual growth and shared humanity. And as spring turned to summer, we celebrated small victories like the center's first graduation ceremony, where several teens, including Aisha, received certificates and scholarships, and Hyun Woo stood proudly handing out awards, his voice steady as he told them, "Never let anyone dim your light," and the audience clapped, not knowing the full story, but feeling the authenticity in his words. And afterward, in the privacy of our penthouse, we danced slowly to old soul music mixed with Korean ballads, creating our own cultural harmony. And he spun me around, laughing in a way I had rarely heard before, free and light and full of hope. And in those arms, I felt the positive energy flowing, the inspiration that even the most forced beginnings could lead to beautiful continuations when kindness and selflessness remained the foundation. And though challenges would surely come again like whispers of new rivals or internal doubts, we faced them side by side, the former captive and her once captor, now partners, in every sense building a life that proved love could redeem, rewrite, and renew. And together we kept choosing each day to be the light for each other and for the world around us, letting the story unfold naturally through more acts of compassion, more moments of realization, and more heartfelt connections that showed humanity always had the power to transform even the darkest of hearts, if only someone was brave enough to keep believing in it.